Good morning and welcome to Morning Scoop for Saturday, July 31st. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Minnesota game is in 33 days, the game against Michigan in 119 days. Fall camp opens for the Buckeyes in just 3 days, and the start of the 2021 season is just over a month away. That means it's time for one of the most popular guests we have on all year long. His name is Phil Steele. You know him from his annual preview magazine. It's branded as the book the experts cannot do without, and I can tell you, look, if you're watching on YouTube, yes, I always have my copy close at hand when I'm prepping for these shows. Phil, thank you for joining me.
Hey, a real pleasure, Tom. Always enjoy our conversations, my friend.
So as soon as the book came out this year, people on our message board at BuckeyeScoop.com are going, whoa, wait a minute. Because there was you have Ohio State's quarterbacks ranked 31st in the nation in your rankings of each position group this year. But then you also have C.J. Stroud 7th as a Heisman candidate. Now, I mean, my assumption is those two things are calculated in very different ways. But can you let people know how you sort of figure, have those position rankings done, per school nationally, and then how you could have 31st in the nation and then 7th as a Heisman candidate?
Right, yeah, that's a great question. It's pretty easy to explain as well. As you know, Tom, Ohio State has 0 career pass attempts. It's the first time since 1952 that Ohio State has come into a season with the entire quarterback position having 0 career pass attempts. So when I'm doing my rankings of the quarterbacks in the top of the magazine, the quarterback units, naturally, every unit in the country has more experience, more of a projection moving Ohio State up there to 31, just knowing the talent they have. But it's tough to put them much higher than 31 based on the fact not a single quarterback has thrown a pass in a single game this year. However, putting C.J. Stroud on the Heisman list is a projection. I think all 3 of the first-year starting quarterbacks for the big 3 teams. I'm talking about Alabama with Bryce Young, Clemson with DJ Uiagalelei, and Ohio State, which I'm projecting C.J. Stroud. Whoever the quarterback is going to be a Heisman finalist at the end of the year because they're going to be playing for an undefeated team. In C.J.'s case, he'll be thrown to the number 1 set of receivers in the country. He's surrounded by my number 2 rated offensive line and number 8 rated running backs. So I think whichever quarterback emerges, and I think it'll be C.J., with that kind of supporting cast, will put up a big season and probably end up being a Heisman finalist, being the quarterback for an undefeated team at the end of the year.
That is, Heisman finalist and quarterback for a top 5 team generally have gone pretty closely hand in hand. So it's probably a pretty good guess on your part. One of the features I check every year in the magazine is called turnovers equals turnaround. And the Buckeyes are at the very top of that list, but not on the good side. So can you explain what that list is and then what it could potentially mean for Ohio State this fall?
Yeah, and it's a list which I actually put in my very first magazine, Tom, way back in 1995. It was the one analytics article I had. And, of course, back in 1995, the word analytics didn't even exist. I put that in, and that got me going because it was one of those where if you had plus double-digit turnovers, I had gone back and done about 5 years research on it. There's about 75 to 80% of the teams had a weaker record than next year. And meanwhile, if you had negative double-digit turnovers, once again, 75 to 80% of the teams had a better record than next year. So I used that 27 years ago, and I tell you what, every year for the 27 years, it stayed in that 75, 80% range every year. And it's tried and true. Now, that does mean that 20% of the teams go against the grain, and generally you find, and I find, that the power teams, the Alabamas, for example, Alabama had I think it was a 3-year stretch of plus double-digit turnovers where their record did not get weaker. So that put them in the minority of the turnovers equals turnaround. And I think in Ohio State's case, that's probably going to be the key here. You look at the fact that, the previous 2 years are +9, +6. They rarely are negative turnovers, and I think at +10, they barely made that list this past year.
So you have two. One of the other features that I always like is you have your most improved teams and you have your surprise teams. And you've got 2 of the Buckeyes 2021 opponents on your list of the biggest surprise teams for this season. Penn State is actually at your top of your list of the most improved teams. And if you remember the 2020 Penn State season, I'm sure people can figure out why they're probably due for a step forward. But they're also number 7 on that list of surprises. Oregon, number 11 on that list of surprises. How do you determine which teams are on that surprise list? And, the fact that you've got 2 kind of premier Ohio State opponents on that list, is that an indication that this may be a little bit of a tougher schedule than people are anticipating this year for the Buckeyes?
Great question, Tom. First of all, my most improved list every year, and this has changed since the start of the magazine. When I started doing the most improved list, it was just based on the teams that I thought would have the biggest increase in record. But I think over the last 6 or 7 years, I've made it where it's a team that either had a losing record last year or didn't make a bowl with a 500 record, and a team that I thought would get to a bowl game this year and have a big increase in record. And that's why Penn State made it to number one. Naturally, there's a lot of teams. All of the teams on my most improved list are teams that had losing records last year that I expect to be in bowls. But Penn State will be the one with the highest projected win margin difference from last year. Penn State last season was number 7 in the country coming into the year. They, of course, lost their first 5 games. You go back to that Indiana game, for example. They had a 488 to 211 yard edge. Now, you don't lose games like that, and they lost on a very controversial 2-point conversion, sort of set their season in motion. They had some close losses, but at the end of the year, they outgained their opponents by 102 yards per game. Generally, if you play a 9-game schedule and you outgain your opponents by 102 yards, you're basically a 7-2 or an 8-1 team with my metrics, and Penn State was much better than their final record last year. I think Sean Clifford bounces back, has a bigger year this year. Remember, last year they lost basically their top 3 running backs by game 1. This year they're 4 deep at running back with guys that are NFL caliber, with Noah Cain, Kevon Lee, John Lovett, the transfer from Baylor, and Devin Ford. Offensive line loaded. Defensively, they're there. I just think you're going to see a big bounce-back season. Now, they do have 3 tough road games. They have to play Wisconsin, Iowa, and Ohio State all on the road. I've got an underdog in all 3 of those, but they could easily steal one and get to double-digit wins this season. Now, my surprise team list is different. Every year in February, I project the AP top 10, and we've had I think a 95% success rate on it. The last 3 years, we've hit 10 of 10. I believe only 3 or 4 times have we missed on the 10 teams that are going to be in the AP top 10. And then what I do is I take a look at all the rest of the teams, a non-top 10 team that I think could slip in there and actually make the playoff. Naturally, Penn State fits that category. If they were to upset, let's say, Iowa or Wisconsin, and then somehow upset Ohio State and Columbus, they could slip in there and beat the team that makes the playoff that won't be in the top 10 at the start of the year. And Oregon also fits that list. Now, Oregon's got a tough schedule. I mean, they have to play Ohio State on the road. They have to play Washington on the road this year. They also have to play Utah on the road. So it's a tough schedule for the Ducks, but they're a talented team. Last year, they had an offensive line with 0 experience. They've got my number 8 offensive line this year, my number 4 set of receivers. Probably the biggest question mark on the team is going to be quarterback. Anthony Brown taking over as the new player there, but they were just voted the top team in the Pac-12. I've got them second in the Pac-12 North behind Washington, mostly due to the schedule, but they will be a tough out for the Buckeyes. However, I'll throw this little tidbit out to you, Tom. When I looked at Ohio State and went through every game for the season, it took me about a little over a month to go through every game for every team on the season, and I project my lines on the game, who I think will be favored and by how much. I do have Ohio State a double-digit favorite in every single game this year.
Yeah, and that was something that you go through the history of college football, and it's like that doesn't happen very often, that a team will be a double-digit favorite or win every game by double digits. And Ohio State just did that a couple of years ago, at least in the regular season in the Big Ten championship game in 2019. I think they might have done that. No, last year they had the close one against Indiana. But yeah, they have been kind of double digits ahead of pretty much everyone the last couple of years during the regular season. The top of most preseason polls and rankings this year is fairly consistent. It's just kind of like you take the 5 teams: Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, Clemson, Oklahoma, in some order, throw them in a hat and shake them out and see what comes out. You have Oklahoma at the top of that list. Now, I mean, I think people kind of at this point are sort of rolling their eyes about Oklahoma, that they're only so good, and then they get to, you get to the college football playoff and then they lose. And so, but why are you so high on Oklahoma this year? What makes you think that they're number one this year, and that, this is the year that they really put it all together?
Well, we all know Lincoln Riley, when he's got an experienced quarterback, or even in last year when they didn't have an experienced quarterback, they averaged 43 points per game. But when he's got an experienced quarterback, they basically average about 550 yards per game and have the best offense in the country. He's had 3 veteran quarterbacks. He's got 2 Heisman trophies and a Heisman Trophy finalist of those 3 veteran quarterbacks. And he's got one coming back this year in Spencer Rattler. And Spencer Rattler is my favorite to win the Heisman Trophy. And he I like the way he responded last year when he got benched against Texas. He came back and had a great second half of the season. And I think he's probably the best quarterback in the country, and he's in the Lincoln Riley offense. At running back, they've got Kennedy Brooks, a two-time 1,000-yard rusher who opted out last year, and Eric Gray, who is a dynamic running back at Tennessee. They have a number 4 set of running backs in the country. They have a number 2 set of receivers, Marvin Mims, Alex Stogner at tight end. And then the offensive line I rate best in the country. I do feel Oklahoma is the best offense in the country. Now, that hasn't been the problem. You go back to their 3 playoff losses that you mentioned, Tom. They gave up 54, 45, and 63 points and lost all 3 games, although the Georgia game did go to overtime, and they had led that thing by a pretty good margin and came up short. Well, the difference this year is defense. And last year, they actually had a better defense than Alabama, statistically, and only allowed 21 points per game. This year, they've got 8 starters back on the defensive side of the ball. They have my number 3 rated defensive line. They get pressure on the quarterback, led by Isaiah Thomas at defensive end and Nick Benito at the other end spot. Last year, Oklahoma had 37 sacks in the shortened season. They also have my number 9 set of linebackers, number 3 defensive backs. They finally have added some size to the defensive back room. They used to have a bunch of 5'10" guys running around back there. Now they've got some plus 6 footers, and they're tough on special teams. And then you look at the schedule this year, they'll be favored in all their games. I think this year when they make the playoff, they've got the defense to go along with the offense. In fact, I rate their defense number 5 in the country this year. And finally, look at the 4 teams that made the playoff last year. I think when talking to 110 of the 130 head coaches this year, almost everybody has 15, 16, 17 returning starters, including Oklahoma, 15 returning starters and their quarterback. The 4 teams that made the playoff last year, they all have 9, 10, 11 returning starters, and all of them lose their starting quarterback. So I think it's a good year for Oklahoma to burst through and win their first national title since 2000.
And then you have Alabama number 2. I mean, that is a team that obviously is sort of in the Ohio State boat where they have loads and loads of talent, but are replacing a lot of guys this year. Got Georgia number 5. I've seen places with it the other way. I think there's, you never want to doubt Nick Saban. I think that's something Ohio State fans may have learned the hard way last year. You never doubt Nick Saban at this point. But is that what led you to rank the Tide ahead of the Dogs, just kind of overall talent? Because Georgia is, one of the few teams that can kind of stack up with Alabama in terms of talent on just sort of across the field.
Yeah, I feel very confident, Tom, that when the AP poll comes out in mid-August or the start of August, Alabama will be preseason number 1. And the reason is, last year there were major doubts on Alabama. They hadn't made the playoff for 2 years, or they haven't won the national championship, I should say, for 2 years. Didn't even make the playoff in 2019. Last year they had to replace their starting quarterback, a first-round draft pick, 2 first-round draft pick receivers, and 3 starting offensive linemen. How do you recover from that? Oh, they put up 48.5 points per game. They won the national title, blowing opponents out down the stretch. Well, this year they lose, guess what? A first-round draft pick quarterback, 2 first-round draft pick receivers, and 3 starting offensive linemen. Sounds very familiar to last year. I don't think they'll be as potent passing the ball. I don't think that Bryce Young will match the 41-4 ratio that Mac Jones had last year, but this is a talented team, naturally, across the board. He gets the best recruiting classes every year. And here's the thing about Alabama, too. Defensively, the last 5 years, they've only had 5 returning starters or less. This year, they got 8 returning starters on defense. They may have the best defense in the country. That makes them dangerous. Now, I will say this. Alabama's got 2 games I'm going to circle on their schedule. College Station, October 9th. Texas A&M is going to be a very dangerous game for them. A&M loses 4 starters on the offensive line, but when I talked to Coach Jimbo Fisher going over the team with them, he feels that this year's offensive line is more talented, has more NFL prospects. In fact, of the 4 guys that they lost, only 1 got drafted. He feels all 5 starting offensive linemen this year are NFL draft guys. And so I think the offensive line could even be better than the Joe Moore Award finalists last year. That's going to make that game very dangerous in College Station with the full crowd. And then the other game would be the game you just mentioned, Georgia in the SEC Championship. And remember, the last 2 times Georgia's played Alabama in the postseason, I think Georgia trailed those games by a combined 2 minutes. And yet they lost both games. So they know they can play with Alabama in the postseason. I do see a couple of landmines potentially on Alabama's schedule this year.
Clemson is kind of in that same boat as the Buckeyes and the Tide, where there's lots of talent on the roster, but they're replacing some big names, including a quarterback. Is this a step back season for the Tigers, or is this just kind of like business as usual for Dabo?
Yeah, they'll be favored in all their games. They'll be favored by double digits in all their games with the exception of the opener, Georgia. And I'm anticipating that one, Tom. That's going to be a heck of a game right out of the box. Clemson's strengths this year, defensive line. It is the best defensive line in the country. Dabo's comparing it to the one that produced all those high NFL draft picks a couple years ago, and I believe it is the best defensive line in the country. They got my number 3 set of linebackers, number 8 defensive backs. Your question marks would be quarterback and running back, but DJ Uiagalelei is a guy that put up 38 points per game in his 2 starts, and he's got a better receiving core to throw to. I rate them number 3 in the country, and a better offensive line than he had last year. I thought their offensive line was sort of average last year. This year I rated the number 14 offensive line in the country. So I think Clemson, a pretty safe pick to win the ACC and get back to the playoff this year, even though they lose the number 1 pick in the NFL draft in Trevor Lawrence. DJ Uiagalelei is a big boy. I mean, he is huge, about 250 pounds. Linebacker's going to have a tough time tackling him, and he proved last year he can throw the football very well.
All right, and this is an Ohio State podcast, so I'll let you go on this one. What is your prediction for Ohio State this year? Do they run the table to make the playoff? Do they slip up somewhere in the regular season? What are you sort of forecasting for the Buckeyes?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very good year for Ohio State. I see them, and the good thing is the home field edges, I think this year are going to be huge in the fact that fans were deprived from going to the games last year. They're going to come back and be super loud. And Ohio State gets their 2 toughest opponents of the year, Oregon and Penn State, both at home, which is a big time advantage. As mentioned, I've got them a double-digit favorite in every game, so I do think they run the table. I think Wisconsin is a potential threat in the Big Ten title game. I've got them as my number 2 surprise team in the country. They're dangerous because they have a veteran offensive line. And last year they didn't have that feature running back. They only averaged 3.9 yards per carry. They usually average 5 or 6 yards per carry. Well, Jalen Berger emerged down the stretch as is the lone VHT of that group. Now this year they've got 4, and a VHT is a very highly touted running back. This year they have 4 VHT running backs, including a Clemson transfer. And they've got a quarterback in Graham Mertz who should be among the best in the country. So I think Wisconsin could be a threat, but yes, I see Ohio State winning the Big Ten, and they make my cover. I've got them making the playoff this year once again, and that, of course, gives them a great shot at a national title. Let's hope they get there.
And yes, you do have Chris Olave as one of the guys on the cover this year. If people did not do what I did and rush out as soon as it was, actually, I actually pre-ordered it, but for the people who did not rush out the first day it was available, let people know how they can get the magazine and also let them know about Phil Steele Plus as well.
Hey, I appreciate that, Tom. Yeah. Now, this year we did a little switch up. We are going exclusively at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million this year, so do make sure you check those places out. They sold out, but they're getting restocked, so I think there should be magazines in there right now, Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. I'll actually be coming to Columbus on Wednesday, August the 11th, for a book signing at 2 different places, so follow me on Twitter at Phil Steele 042. And if you already bought a magazine, just bring it to the book signing. I'll sign it for you. And if you haven't bought one yet, we'll have plenty of magazines in stock. So I'll be in Columbus on August the 11th. More on philsteele.com or Phil Steele 042 for that. And then finally, as you mentioned, you can get the magazine online at philsteele.com. And you can also get a double deal where you get the hard copy and the digital copy at a reduced price. And we're updating the digital copy all the way until the start of the season. We'll have players circled that are gone. We'll have added players on the roster. So make sure you get both of those copies. You get it at a discount when you go to philsteele.com. And finally, as you mentioned, Tom, Phil Steele Plus is basically the magazine, but even better. It's like the magazine on steroids because it's updated all season long, and it's color-coded green and red. And you could see the stats that are really good for a team right off the bat and the stats that are really bad for a team right off the bat by looking at the green and red. And as mentioned, it's updated all season long. We got starts lost, individual stats, team pages, and much more on Phil Steele Plus.
All right. Well, greatly appreciate you as always coming on, and thank you for joining me.
Hey, Tom, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on once again. Always enjoy our conversations.
Thanks again to Phil for what is always one of my favorite conversations of the year. We'll probably have him on sometime a little later on. We generally have to do that at least pre-playoff or so. Don't get to break glass in case of emergency with Phil Steele very often, but it's always one of the most popular shows that we do. So thanks again to him for coming on. if you want to know more about the Ohio State football team that sounds like it might be pretty good this year. Great place to do that would be at BuckeyeScoop.com. We've got our fantastic team of insiders providing all sorts of insight and analysis. Camp opens next week. Lots of news going on around the program. We've been talking about a whole bunch of different stuff this week. Conference realignment, Quinn Ewers, all that, and so much more at BuckeyeScoop.com. Make sure you also check out all of our great podcasts. You know about the Morning Scoop. You probably know about Buckeye Weekly. We also have a bunch of other great podcasts you definitely need to check out. Kirk Barton's Scoop World Order, Alex Gleitman's Around the Oval, Dominic Smith's Beyond the Shoe, the Sloopcast guys, the Silver Bullets guys. There is something for everyone just on your podcast platform of choice. Just search Buckeye Scoop. Check out all of those great shows. You can subscribe right there and also leave us a 5-star rating and review, which will help other folks find those shows as well. And finally, youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. If you're watching on YouTube, should be popping up right about now a graphic with another video you can watch from our channel, but also a little circle in the right-hand corner that will tell you that you can click on that will let you subscribe to our channel, youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. Then you get notified every time we post a new video. We are going to be posting a lot of new videos this month, and they should be pretty fantastic because we've got all of our great podcasts. We've also got our pregame shows, postgame shows, player and coach interviews, a little bit of everything for everyone there at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. It's all free. All you need to do is subscribe, and you get notified every time we post a new video. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.